Hello, everyone. This is a quick walkthrough through an AQA past paper question on the Merchant of Venice from Act 1, Scene 3. As you may have seen elsewhere, maybe with Mr. Bruff, he's done a breakdown, a sort of, not quite analysis, maybe I would say, but a breakdown of the motivations and the kind of dynamics that go on between Antonio, Bassanio, and Shylock in this scene. So Antonio has asked Shylock to lend him some money. In fact, Bassanio is in this scene before Antonio is, and that sum is 3,000 ducats, quite a large sum, and it's the sum Bassanio is going to use to get him to Belmont and furnish him with kind of clothes and things, and for his courtship to Portia. Anyway, so Shylock delivers this monologue, and some people have really been split on the nature of Shylock's kind of personality. In one sense, he enjoys having this power, and he will enjoy having this power over Antonio, who has been quite terrible to him for his business practices. The fact that he violates the Christian law of usury and makes profit in that way. And others have suggested that Shylock, this is actually quite a humanizing monologue. It really deepens our understanding of why he does what he does in demanding the pound of flesh. Anyway, so let's read it. So Shylock says, Signor Antonio, many a time and oft in the Rialto, in the business district of Venice, a business district, you have rated me about my money and my usances. So you have criticized me about the way I use my money to generate profit. Still I have borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. So the badge of the Jewish people is long-standing suffering, as it goes back to perhaps biblical times. So you've called me a misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabazine. So these are the offences from Antonio. And for all use of that which is mine own. So this is my own money. Why shouldn't I do what I so well please? I'm not a Christian. I don't have to abide by the Christian law. Well then, he continues, it now appears you need my help. Go to then, you come to me and you say, Shylock, we would have monies. You say so. You did that, void your room upon my beard. So void your room, kind of your spit, and foot me as you spurn a stranger cur over your threshold, as you kind of would kick a stranger out of your private property. Monies is your suit. What should I say to you? So he's asking a kind of rhetorical question. Should I not say had a dog money? If you call me a dog, should we say had a dog, not money? So this is quite kind of clever and quite tongue-in-cheek in a way. At least maybe you could interpret it that way. Is it possible a cur can lend 3,000 ducats? Or shall I bend low and in a bondman key with bated breath and whispering humbleness say this? Fair sir, you spit on me on Wednesday last. You spurned me on such a day. Another time you called me dog. And for these courtesies I'll lend you thus much monies. Okay, so this is the monologue. And the question is from AQA, if we're thinking about answering this, if we're GCSE students. Starting with this speech, how does Shakespeare present Shylock's feelings about the way he is treated? Okay, so we've already said there's kind of the enjoyment of power, and there's a kind of piercing, humanizing portrait of the way he kind of has endured these sufferings and will continue to do so, but he's simply just sort of releasing his anger in a way, you could say, maybe. So how does Shakespeare present Shylock in this speech? So we need a close reading of the content and the techniques of the quote, of the monologue, and how Shakespeare will present Shylock in the play as a whole. So this is maybe quite humanizing, but it contrasts with Shylock's later cruelty on his insistence. Even as he's offered twice the sum, 6,000 ducats in court, he'll say, no, I demand the pound of flesh. So before we go and look at what I've written, it's just worth looking at how that monologue is embedded in the larger scene. So after Shylock has finished, Antonio says, I'm as like to call thee so again. I'll probably call you all of these things again and spit on you and reject you again too. But if you're going to lend this money, lend it to your enemy instead of your friend. So when did friends ever charge interest? Instead, lend it to me, because if I go bankrupt, it's easier for you to take your penalty from the enemy. So Shylock is quite clever in a sense. He says, why, look, you now storm. So why are you getting so angry? Look at you getting so all riled up. I want to be friends with you and forget all the times you've embarrassed and humiliated me. I want to give you what you need and not charge a penny of interest. Supply your present wants and take no doit of usance for my monies. And you'll not hear me. This is kind I offer. So Bassanio is quite, he doesn't see what's coming in a sense. And we've seen in the previous scene with Bassanio and Antonio alone, Antonio saying, Shylock is not to be trusted. And Antonio kind of continues with his suspicion, and he says, it's a deal. I'll agree to those terms and even say that Jews are nice. Content in faith, I'll seal to such a bond and say there is much kindness in a Jew, if it is the case that you're offering me a loan without interest. And Antonio feels confident because he has the ships, the kind of monies that is coming back from Tripolis, London, and Mexico, as well as one other, I think. I think that might be the Indies. So he ends on a rhyming couplet, and he says, come on, in this there can be no dismay. My ships come home a month before the day. Okay, so this question, how does Shakespeare present Shylock's feelings about the way he's treated? These set of notes are not a full essay. They're just going to give you some indication of some of the assessment objectives, some of the context, a way to offer a close reading of the monologue, and some helpful things that you can carry forward into your own essay writing. So I think one of the first things to just establish, maybe arguably, is that in this monologue, in this quote at least, Shakespeare is not really troubling much of the economic or religious issues of at least Venetian life or English life. Obviously, The Merchant of Venice is, we think, set during the same time as the time Shakespeare was writing, so the 1590s. It's not set in an earlier time in Venice. It's not really troubling the economic or religious issues of European or English life. It's not really troubling those things, but it is. There is an element in which you can look at this through the context of outrageous and exploitative lending for profit, and the resentment towards it that did exist in Shakespeare's London in the 1590s when he was writing this play. So you could say here at least Shakespeare is simply engaging with a character in pain who has remembrance of the kind of casual injustices he faces. So being spat on by a prejudiced man, though probably no more prejudiced than others, and who is now asking for his help. From the monologue, we are supplied with some answer to one of the main questions asked about Shylock. Why does he demand a pound of flesh from Antonio as a term of the bond if Antonio is able to pay the 3,000 ducats back within 3 months? And I think one of those things, the key theme, one of those things is power. He enjoys the power and the possibility of revenge. However, while we can add that there, I think it's better to just offer a close reading of the monologue, and we can maybe add some point about power to what we've already written here. What have I written here? So exploring the imagery, meter, and word choice of this monologue, Shylock imagines himself a long-suffering Jew, but no more exceptional than others, connected with the long history of his tribe, where sufferance is the more normal condition. Perhaps I could have changed that, but perhaps that wasn't necessary as such. But I think it's quite important to get across this kind of the ways in which, even though Jewishness is not really explored in much detail, it's set up as the opposite towards to the Christian law and the Christian practices around money. So it's just a slightly important point, I would say. Anyway, the rhythm of the first line suggests that Shylock has a powerful emotional feelings towards Antonio. So this is a simple point evidence explanation formula, which you're probably very kind of familiar with as GCSE students. So He says, Signor Antonio, many a time and oft. And this has the extra I am in it, the extra kind of beat, many a time and oft. So there are 12 rather than the standard 10 beats, many a time and oft. So these extra beats suggest that Shylock cannot contain his powerful dislike of Antonio within a kind of measured or reasoned rhythm. It also suggests that there might be a kind of self-consciously performative aspect to his anger, so he's kind of delivering this speech for the benefit of Antonio and Bassanio. It is as though his kind of emotion and resentment are kind of bursting and overflowing the end of the verse line. So the extra beat also helps emphasize how frequently Antonio has insulted Shylock in the past. So it's subtle and it's worth commenting on. But there's also the use of quoted imagined speech in this monologue, second point now, second PEE paragraph, in order to try and shame Antonio for his past behaviour towards Shylock and make fun of what he could say to Antonio now, who's standing before him. You say, Shylock, we would have monies. What should I say to you? Should I not say, hath a dog money? And also, fair sir, you spat on me Wednesday last, you spur me on such a day, another time, you call me a dog. So there's humour and pathos to this idea that the comparison which comes from Shylock recognizing that he's perceived and treated as though he were a dog, an alien, someone to be spat and kicked. And if this is the case, he reasons, why cannot the common stray assist Antonio? This is a kind of amusing example of his... it's an example of amusing, accurate argumentation, I said, perhaps. Well, it is, but it is also perhaps establishes his later ability to make judgments, to make good judgments for the later courtroom dispute, one which he'll lose to the more nimbly minded Portia, who's disguised as the law clerk. So overall, this monologue, you could say, helps to humanize Shylock, and this is arguably done on at least one other occasion. So if we're going to talk about the other examples of Shylock's feelings, as this question demands, we might think of the later example in Act 3, Scene 1, when he talks in prose rather than verse, as he did in Act 1, Scene 3, and when he says, I am a Jew, hath a Jew not eyes, hath a Jew not hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed with the same means, woman called by the same winter and summer as a Christian is, and so on and so on and so on. So, rather than simply viewing these famous passages as justifying Shylock's later fierce cruelty, although you could do that as well, these lines humanize and deepen Shylock's character, and they allow us some measure of his motivation, rather than attribute anything intrinsic, belonging naturally to Jews or Jewishness. So it really... And if we were to say that it belongs naturally to Jews or Jewishness, then we'd be, open to the charge of anti-Semitism quite rightly. So that's one example of Shylock's feelings, and that gives you some kind of ways into beginning your analysis, thinking about some of the context, and thinking about how you might come to some kind of conclusion about it. So Shylock's piercing humanity in these examples does not really overall affect the narrative course of the play. He's silenced and punished overall, both kind of fiscally, financially, and he's compelled to accept baptism as a Christian. And this is according to the then prevailing views in England of the fundamental non-humanity of Jews and Jewishness. So it's worth saying, actually, that in 1594, I think it was, Lopez, a Portuguese converso, a convert from kind of Judaism, he was a physician, a surgeon of Queen Elizabeth. He was put to death, and there were kind of boos and jeers as he was as put to death before a crowd. So these were kind of this kind of ritual humiliation of Jews, I guess, in Elizabethan England was not unfamiliar to a local London audience. And overall, you could say, if you're just thinking a little bit more about the conclusions, so there is a tension between the human Shylock here And these attacks on what is obviously considered the non-human nature of Jews and Jewishness by the Venetians of the play, as well as perhaps some of Shakespeare's spectators. However, it's probably too much to suggest that it is a complete exposition of how Shakespeare himself viewed Jews and Jewishness, any more than, say, you can say the taming of the shrew was meant as a kind of assault on women, and therefore explains a savage assault on women, and therefore explains Shakespeare's views about women, or any more than the Tempest is kind of criticizes magicians and magic. So really, I'd be careful to say that, you know, this play offers a kind of key into Shakespeare's mind,